Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented by Evangelical Christian Credit Union. I'm Jack Latour with the Strategic Services team here at ECCU. We're going to look at how tithers learned to be generous, and we're going to look at where they give inside and outside their churches. We'll look at why some Christians don't tithe, and also at how to cultivate a culture of generosity among the people who support your ministry. And the guy who's going to tell us all about that is the guy I'd like to introduce right now. Again, my name is Jack Latour. I came to ECCU in 2006 after serving on staff at 2 churches. Prior to that, I worked in Christian radio ministry. Joining me today is generosity expert Pastor Brian Kluth. Brian was senior pastor of the First Evangelical Free Church of Colorado Springs for a decade. And in 2009, the church commissioned him to a newly created full-time staff position as what they called Generosity Minister at Large to the Body of Christ. This role allows Brian to serve across the country and around the world through speaking, writing. He creates online and video materials and does national research, which is the focus of what he'll be talking about today. Hey, welcome, Brian.
Hey, great to be with you, Jack, and all the listeners. We want to be encouraging everybody today, so we trust that they'll stay tuned and take in what we have, and then we have a lot of free resources for them at the end of this webinar.
Terrific, terrific. Hey, Brian, I mentioned poll questions. Let's get started here with the first one. We're going to try to find out the perceptions of everyone that the people who are attending have of tithers and their giving practices. So here's our first poll question. Check any of the statements that are true. The question is, well, you can see the question is, which of these do you think are true? And you can check any of them that you think are true. If you don't think any are true, then don't check any. We'll give people a little bit of time to make their selections and then see what comes up on the screen. Another moment here, and we'll see how things play out. Well, there you have it. So almost 2/3 of you think that women make most of the donations among tithers. Similar percentage think that most tithers give based on their net income, and a third of you-ish think tithers give most outside their churches. What do you think of those answers, Brian?
Well, I would agree. I would have the same way as everybody else, but this research shows some interesting results that are different than what I have thought for 25 years, and we'll get into that as we go along. But I was surprised by some of the results, and we will be sharing those throughout this event.
Oh, terrific. Well, let's take that as our cue to let you kind of start enlightening people with the research that we've gotten, Brian, or that you've worked on.
Okay. Well, again, appreciate everybody being on and listening here. 5 years ago, just kind of right at the start of what they call the Great Recession, I began to start some research I called the State of the Plate. And over those 5 years, we've gathered information on church giving. We've also collected personal information from Christians, their personal giving and financial practices. And this year, we released this 5-year study, and we have the results of 413 people that do give 10% or more. To my knowledge, this is unprecedented research. Nothing this in-depth has ever been done previously. We had 36 questions, 250 potential answers. We got results from people from 50 states and 70 countries. And so we're excited to be able to share this information and these insights, but also not just the information and the insights, but applications for, well, what does this information mean? It says in the Bible, spoken of this, they understood the times and they knew what to do. we're going to give you information, but more importantly, we're going to challenge you and encourage you to take that information and apply it in your local setting, your local situation, so that you can help increase the number of people that are generous givers. So that's what we're going to be doing, and we've had great partnership with ECCU, Christianity Today, ECCU, and I Ministry to do this research that we're bringing to you. So that's the kind of the kickoff slide, and I'm going to go into the next one. I'm going to provide a disclaimer. So let me give you the disclaimer. Important disclaimer on this tithing research. We are using the term tither to describe all survey participants who donate 10% or more annually. We recognize that 10% was an Old Testament law, but our research also recognizes, based on our studies, that an estimated 10 million people in America donate more than $50 billion annually. And they do it voluntarily and freely, giving that 10% or more, even though many of them may not consider themselves tithers because of the connection to the Old Testament. So what we're saying here is that among mature Christians, many of them do give 10% or more. And so that's how we're using the word tithers. Whenever we put any information up on, I write quite a few articles, newspapers, and online and magazines and all that. We get a lot of people that want to argue the whole phrase tithe, and I understand the argument, but this is simply where people actively give 10% or more. And who are these people? Well, they're people that have connections to ECCU, ECFA, and Maximum Generosity. An amazing 81% of those people are actively giving 10% or more. So we're kind of the cream of the crop. This is not the average pew sitter. These are people that are dedicated to Christ and devoted to their local church and to ministries they care about. But they provided us wonderful insights into their giving practices and their financial picture. We're to at least thousands of people that have so graciously shared their information with us. We're going to move here. I'm going to give you kind of a big picture for just a moment, and then we'll go to break it down into the individuals. But in the big picture, since the Great Recession hit in the fall of 2008, churches kind of escaped really getting hammered in 2008. The Great Recession really did not show up in the giving plates, the offering plates of churches until 2009. And in 2009, only 35% saw giving increase from the previous year. 2/3 of churches saw giving flatline or decline. And so churches, any other time in the history of our lifetimes, everybody listening right now, churches got hit in 2009 harder than any time ever while we've been living. So suddenly churches were kind of scrambling in 2009, having to adjust budgeted savings and really kind of grapple with a new normal. Fortunately, we've seen a bit of a recovery that's gone on the last year, 2010. 43% of churches are giving increase from the year before. 2011, 51%, and then now this year, 2012, 53%. So we are seeing, with an improved economy, we are seeing giving begin to improve again. But even at 53% number in 2012, that means nearly half the churches in America are seeing flatline giving or giving decline. And so we are still in the midst of some real challenges, and so we're going to try to use the resources here, the information we give you today, to say, okay, how do you help grow givers and giving? How do you do that in the midst of a local church environment, and by taking a look at people that actively and faithfully do give 10% or more? All right, let's take a look here. What are the top 5 places that tithers give inside their local church? 97% of them give to the general offerings, however you collect them, in a box or passing the plate or online. And 76% do that 1 to 4 times a year. Most probably do not do it weekly. Most probably do it, twice a month or once a month, kind of depending on how they get paid. And then there were some that just did it several times a year. Missions giving in local churches. People will respond to missions programs, missions projects, short-term missions activities. A high percentage of tithers will actively support missions that are occurring in a local church. 87% will, however you collect it or however you accept offerings, will participate in benevolence programs for the needy, that for the needy maybe in your church or in your community, but they will actively give to that. 6% have given to building projects and capital campaigns, so people will actively support that. And 58% still offerings for the pastor or church staff. This is more indicative of the history of the church. Some churches have no history of collecting a special offering for their pastor or their pastors or and their staff. I know I was even had a tradition of collecting an annual Christmas offering, love offering that we gave to, originally it was always to the pastor, and when I became the pastor I said no, I want it for the whole staff. But it was a wonderful thing that happened once a year. There was a love offering given at Christmas, love offering given at Christmas time, and usually for all the staff that meant several $100s, which really helped bless them at the Christmas time, and they learned to really love that and appreciate that. And I was so glad to do that myself when I received it, but also share it with staff. But here's the application. What does that mean? It's not all about the offering plate. People do respond to various needs, various appeals, various campaigns. So it's very important as church leaders to plan special appeals prayerfully and carefully during your calendar year. How do you want to collect for benevolence? What are the missions projects you want to focus on? How do you want to do that? Do you want to have a particular campaign? Do you want to have a faith promise event? Do you want to focus on short-term? Well, how would you like to accomplish that? Do you want to do something for your staff? When would be the time to do that? What about capital projects? The thing to realize, it's not all about just the offering plate for your generous, faithful givers. They will give in multiple places. You just have to plan accordingly. So hopefully that's a helpful insight to everybody listening.
Hey, Brian, Jack here.
Here's an interesting statistic that's kind of pulled. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just discovered we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. Sometimes people might have a little bit of trouble hearing what you're saying. So our apologies for that, folks. The internet is its own animal, so we'll certainly do our best. And maybe Brian, just kind of keep that in mind, and as you speak, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah. We're dependent upon the internet, and the good of it and the bad of it. So we're going to take a look here. One of the things that jumped out, and I'm going to do further research on this in the future. If you take the average income in America, household income is around $50,000 a year. So those that give $5,000 or more, in a sense, would be a tither. In most churches, they only make up 5 to 20% of the givers. So it's usually only a small portion of people are giving $5,000 or more a year, but they often give 50 to 80% of the funding. What I was commenting to people in recent weeks, I said if the rapture occurred and God only took those who give 10% or more, and everybody else is left, our churches would still be well populated, but the doors would close within a few weeks or a few months, because without those people, much of the funding would literally dry up. I do have some specific examples. I personally attend Mission Hills Church in Littleton, Colorado. It's a larger church of about 4,000. 18% of the people give 5,000 or more, and they cover 74% of the funding. Brookwood Church in South Carolina, 10% of those people hit the 5,000 mark, but they make up 58% of the funding. Woodman Valley Chapel in Colorado Springs, a friend of mine, Mike Biederman, provided the information. The executive pastor there, or administrator pastor there, 14% of the people gave 58% of the funds, and then a large church near Chicago, they indicated that 26% gave 78% of the funds. So the challenge here is, do you know your church's percentages? what are the demographics? I'm not talking about the name of the people, I'm talking about the demographics. So if you take whatever number, the 5,000 figure, what percentage of givers is that in your church? And how much of the money do they give annually? You might take the figure of $1,000, and how much do the people that give $1,000 or more, how much do they give? In my working with hundreds and even thousands of churches, I've adopted what's called the Kluth rule of thirds in the average church, and you might want to write this down. 1/3 of the people, their giving records are blank. The people attending. 1/3 of the attendees, the giving records are blank. 1/3 of the people are giving $500 or less, and 1/3 are giving over $500. So in the average church, the majority of your people are not giving faithfully or generously at all. We do have a worksheet that you can access. There's the website. You'll be able to get that at the end of this webinar also, where you can, there's a treasurer's worksheet where you can figure out what are your percentages. The larger the church, the more likely that 50% of your givers, attendees, give nothing of record. And so that's a really, really important just to be aware of, that there's so few people in your church that give faithfully and generously. Jack, you want to comment on that at all? Or?
Well, like you said at the beginning, Brian, what a lot of us are going to hear is things that are going to surprise us, and I think that might be one, particularly the number of people who don't give anything. It underscores, well, for one, it underscores that your church had a really good idea when they commissioned you to be a generosity minister at large, but it certainly is a call to churches and ministries across the country and beyond to pay attention to how we can help people grow in that way.
Yeah, that's right. Right. One here. Tithers is their church, but they also give outside their church. Somewhat surprisingly, 76% of people indicate that they do give more money to their church, their local church, than they give outside their church. And then we break down further. 45% of tithers give to 1 to 4 places beyond their church. 37% of them give to 10 places, and then 15% of them give to more than 11 places. So tithers are generous, first from the local church, and secondly to other things that matter to them. And we're going to take a look now at the list of, well, where do they give beyond their
Hey, Brian.
Once a tither starts giving beyond their church, yes.
Well, before you jump into where they give outside their churches, we've got a question from Linda. She's asking about one of the, you had mentioned the various places they give inside the church, and her question is having a special offering monthly too frequent? Would it be, if it is, would it be better to do it like 6 times a year? Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, a lot of it's just based on your church history and your church culture. You know, I come out of a church culture, Baptist General Conference and Evangelical Free, and they always had a tradition. You know, they gave communion once a month, and on that Sunday they always put an offering. So that for them it was part of the tradition. If you're starting cold turkey and you've never done special offerings, yeah, you may want to spread out seasonally or every other month. But whatever it is, you want to have it to have a very specific focus. If you're going to do a special offering, you want to have a very concentrated focus so people know why they're giving extra funds. But that's a great question.
Thanks, Linda.
But look at your history, look at what you're wanting to do in the future. All right, so we're going to take a look here at where do they give outside their churches. The number one place is missionaries and mission organizations, and right on the heels of that are short-term missions trips. Tithers are very committed to their faith and sharing of their faith, and so they have a passion for God's work around the world, around the country, and so they're committed to that. What's interesting I found in the research is once you move away from missions focus, they tend to be very focused on the care of individuals. 31% helped an unemployed person they knew. So it might be a neighbor, it might be a friend, but they literally just dug in their pocket, bought them groceries, gave them money, did something. 29% helped a homeless person or a beggar. 29% rescue mission or homeless ministry. So, there's that compassion component. The first one is kind of cause. There's kind of a cause-focused missions, but the second component is a real compassion. And then you have evangelism or evangelistic ministries. Then get into crisis, natural disaster relief ministries of all kinds. There's people that want to respond. They see something in the news. They see a tornado. They see a tsunami. They see a hurricane. They see flooding, and there is a desire to want to help. And so when churches can enable their people to help, that's a really good thing. Child sponsorship is a big thing. Pro-life and crisis pregnancy ministries is important to some Christians. Christian education is important. So what I'm saying here, the application is giving outside the church is primarily focused on causes, personal connections, and crisis relief. And what the challenge is, as a church, are you sharing those opportunities or those ministries or those needs within your church family? People have that in their heart to want to help those kinds of ministries. So are you creating a mechanism or a way to empower them to help? So, again, if there's tornadoes in Oklahoma, they want to give somewhere, and if your church has a way that they're collecting offerings to do that, that's a way you can receive offerings and be a blessing. So do share quality ministry and ministry giving opportunities inside your church. Years ago, missionaries would come to town, mission agencies could preach and be in the pulpit and all of those things. Those things have dried up the last 20 years or so. Very few churches are opening pulpits to quality ministries that are worthy of support, and you may want to think about it. Is there a ministry or one or two ministries that you let your people know about over a 12-month time period, or you focus on in the bulletin or newsletter, or however you want to do it? People do have a passion to give to causes and connections and crisis relief. So as a church, are you facilitating that or hindering that? So that's the challenge to consider. All right. Most tithers donate more than 10%. I'm not sure what you would have thought on this one, but when we ask the question, how much do you give? 23% of them do give 10%, and that's the amount they give. But 54% indicated that they give 11 to 15% of their income, and then another 14% give 16 to 20%, and then 9% give 20%. The implication here, the application here is if you're the person to start giving 10%, for most people they start there, but they do not stop there. My church, not my most recent church where I was a pastor, but my church before that, we used to have a tithing money-back guarantee, and we said we encourage people to start giving 10% more and do it for 90 days. If you have any regrets on that decision, we literally will give back the money to you. And our challenge there was just to get people to start. And it was interesting. We had many people take up the challenge, but we never had anybody come back and ask for money. And so it's just an interesting thing to, if you can get people to get to the 10% mark for whatever reasons, many of them will go from there and grow from there. So it's just an interesting thought. Do people give up the growth? Again, surprising. If you ever talk about this subject, people quickly will say, well, do you give off the net or the gross? Well, 17% give off the net. 28% give off of the gross, and 42%, a whopping 40%, give off the gross plus financial blessings that come into their life. Think about that thought. You know, God's vision are not a paycheck. His paychecks are, a paycheck is part of his provision, but God can provide items you need. God can provide savings and discounts. And when people really get a vision to be generous off of how God provided, 1 Corinthians 2 says on the first day of each week that each of you give according to how God has blessed you or provided for you. The paycheck is only part of that. There are many other financial blessings that come into people's lives, and when you give people a vision for being generous, and you teach generosity, they can begin to get excited about seeing all the ways God provides and being generous. So in my own life, I don't know, if I get something unexpected, if I was going to spend $1,000 on something and I got it for $500, that was a $500 blessing. So I really said, Lord, thank you. And I've sent, $50 or $75 to a missionary somewhere just to thank God for that financial blessing. That's kind of the application of that graph you're looking at there. This is one of the interesting graphs to take a look at. I think in our hearts we kind of would think this, but to have to prove it is very fascinating. Tithers have healthier finances than Christian non-tithers. When you look at 9 different categories of financial health, being debt-free, owing a mortgage, car payments, credit card bills, debts, assets, where you're donating, do you have a will? In every single category, tithers are in a better place than Christian non-tithers. We have put this out on some national news media, and it's been fascinating to comments after the article was written. The Christian Post came out with a big story on this, and the non-tither looks at this chart and says, well, of course the tither is giving because they're better off. The tither looks at the charts and says, no, I'm better off because I'm a giver. And it's fascinating that you can literally statistically show that those who give 10% or more find themselves in a better place financially than those that do not. But I also want to say this is not a prosperity gospel message. I don't believe that message. I believe that's a caricature. It's a falsehood. It's a false Christian doctrine. God doesn't want you healthy, wealthy, wise, and all of that. But what we do see is there is greater health in people's finances. Not greater wealth all the time, but certainly greater health, which can include greater wealth when it comes to those that faithfully are honoring God with what they have. So that's an important thing. And I'm sorry about this looking at this on my screen. I'm going to have to take a moment and get rid of that.
Hey, Brian.
Pop something up here.
Brian, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Jack.
I always try to take something that I've heard and put it in a phrase. I often try to put it in a phrase that helps me remember it. So would a summary of what you just said be something along the lines of, so no, it isn't appropriate or biblical to give more so that you get more. What's biblical is you give more because God has blessed you more. Is that kind of a short version of what you said?
Yeah, I would say we don't give to get. We give to give a blessing.
Yeah.
Okay. We give to give a blessing, not to get a blessing. But I believe Psalm 67:7, God blesses us that all the ends of the earth might worship Him. I believe God does bless us financially so that we can be more generous.
Yeah.
I tell people, don't give to get. You give because you've received something.
Yeah.
You give because you've received. That's the biblical model. That's the biblical principle.
Brian, we've got a question here from Dick in this regard. He's asking, is there further research that validates the testimony of tithers that they're better off because they tithe rather than the other way around? Is there like specific research on that topic?
Well, I've been in this work for 25 to 30 years. I've never seen any in-depth research on tithers at all. What we have here is the most in-depth research that's ever been done in the last 60 years. 6 years ago, George Gallup did some research on tithers. Barna has done some research in the last probably 12 years, but nothing in depth.
Got it.
This particular research is the most in-depth that's ever been done on those that give 10% or more. Tithers give in a variety of ways: checks, cash, clothing, electronics, household good. That'd be like a Goodwill Salvation Army kind of a thing, thrift stores. Digital continues to grow. Online and EFT giving, 36% are now doing that. Church envelope packets are in a decline. Only 22% of them now use those. These are tithers, people that give 10% or more. Giving kiosk, or I should say giving kiosk and iPads are beginning to make their way into some churches, and so people are using those. Larger gifts in kinds, vehicles, boats, RVs, some of them give that. Cell phone and texting, used by a few, stock used by a few. The application for a church and a ministry is you want to create as many opportunities as possible to collect people's offerings. Scripture instructs us to collect people's giving, collect their offerings, collect their tithes. And so if your only system is the offering plate, you've suddenly eliminated people, because there are some people that aren't in there. There are some people that are away on vacation. There are some people that are serving in Sunday school. There are some people that are serving in the nursery. Some people that don't have a check ready or don't have money in their pocket. And if that's the only way you're collecting, you're limiting people's ability to give. You
Sure.
tell people how to give when you're doing other options, but
Hey,
you
Brian.
need to give as many options as possible. Yes.
Anthony has a question. Any idea why giving envelopes are on the decline? At their church, they still use them.
Because it's just out of decline. Some churches don't even offer them anymore. And even in churches, like I'm part of a church, we offer them to anyone that wants them. So we probably have 25% of our people use them, 75% don't. We're not saying don't have that. You use as many ways as possible. We're not saying one way is the right way. We live in a day and age when people manage their finances differently. And so what you want to do is give as many different options as you can. Not saying right or wrong, just saying different. So for some people, they handle their giving by check. Some do it electronically. Some will do it in the moment if there's a kiosk or an iPad. Some will do it with an envelope. Some will stock brokerage account. You just want to create opportunities so people can be faithful, generous givers. When I was in India teaching there, they have tithe houses. Like, what's a tithe house? And they worked among farmers, and so they would literally bring their harvest, a tenth of their harvest, and put it in this house set aside for the first tenth. And so they had to build the building. They literally built the building. It was a tithe house. And so in America, you just want to build as many mechanisms, as many systems as you can to be able to receive people's gifts. Right? Tithers are split on who makes the most of the donations. Statistically, this is different than philanthropy research. In philanthropy research, the statistics are sometimes up to 80% of the time the woman makes the gift. But when it comes to those that give 10% or more, 40% of the time it's usually the man, 35% of the time it's usually the woman, 25% both equally. And I believe the reason for this big distinction between this kind of giving and giving in the charitable world is to give 10% or more is a significant decision. So the man and the woman have to be committed. They have to be involved, and they're very much part of making this happen. And so when it comes to tithers, the man is involved 65% of the time by himself or with his wife. And other times 35% of the wife's usually doing it. But you have that message for faithful giving is really to a family or to a couple. It's not just trying to get individuals to make a decision. An individual will make a smaller decision and give you $25, $50, or $100. But to get thousands of dollars, both the man and the woman are very, very actively involved.
Brian, a question here from Calvin. You've got a little bit of demographic information there, men versus women. What about like young tithers? Any insights in your research as to the giving habits of young tithers versus like 20-something?
What we're going to get to is we will be addressing research on when did people start giving 10% or more.
Okay.
But our particular audience would have been older Christians, and primarily 30s and above. I am working with some people right now that are looking at doing research among the millennials on the whole subject of giving and generosity. But this particular research focuses on more adults, active adults involved in their churches. So.
Yeah. A question from Bob. Are donations that come in by check through online bill pay services included in the check percentages? My guess is online bill pay would be considered kind of the online giving option as opposed to a check.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I think anything online, anything electronically they're doing, would be, well, it could appear in both places. That person checked both. They could check, I give by check, and I give online. So in my life, I'm doing a few things by check. I do most of my giving online.
Yeah.
As a personal example.
Yeah.
All right. This is probably some of the, how would I say? I want to say the saddest research or the saddest statistics, and yet the greatest call to action. I think that's before churches in America especially, because people do have such wealth. Many tithers have significant net assets in their estates, but they have not planned to make any bequests. 23% of them over $250,000, 20% over $500,000, 15% over $1 million in net assets. So you take away all, add up all their assets, their houses, their insurances, their cars, their property, their possessions, their investments. You subtract out their mortgage due and any bills they owe, and you get to their net asset. Okay, we asked that question. They gave us the information. We then asked the question, okay, are you going to be doing anything for God's work out of your accumulated assets or your estate? So 97% of people regularly give to their churches out of their income, but very few are leaving charitable bequests. Only 25% are leaving bequests to their church. 11% to mission agencies, 10% to ministries, 9% to schools, and you can see the list. This is the untapped area of Christian wealth in the world, and in particular in America, where Christians have not been taught or encouraged or empowered to honor God with their accumulated assets and their estate. So my application here is churches must be more proactive in helping people honor the Lord from their accumulated assets and estate plans. Distributing legacy organizers. I actually wrote a legacy organizer to give to my church congregation because I saw that so many people just did not have their affairs in order. Starting a legacy giving club, doing seminars, online estate planning, and more. This is a huge area, and the biggest gifts churches will ever get will be in the area of bequest. It will typically be 5 figures, occasionally 6 figures, and at times it'll even be 7-figure gifts. And yet, everybody listening to me, if you think back the last 5 years of funerals at your churches, and you counted them up, did you have 10? Did you have 50? Did you have 100? How many funerals did your church conduct? And then you answer the question, how many bequests did you receive? You're probably down somewhere, maybe 2 or 3%. 2 or 3%.
Hey, Brian.
Yep.
Here's a question from Dick. He says, to that point, it's likely that those who do make bequests do so to more than one recipient or organization. Do you have the statistic of the percentage who do and who do not make any bequest at all? So
in our research, there's a lot more detail, and everybody listening will have access to the full report. So
Terrific.
We do give a lot more detail, and you can have access to it in the full report. But
Great, good question, Dick. Thanks.
Yeah, but you're absolutely correct. People that give bequests normally giving to multiple organizations. That's absolutely correct. They don't just give to one. Probably very few would just give to one. It's multiple. But when you look at the list of Christian options, very few are giving. So. Most tithers are highly active in their local congregations. This is interesting statistic. 96% attend services every weekend unless they're sick or traveling. Who's the faithful giver? It's frequently the faithful attender. It's not the person that shows up a few times a month, or several times a year, or your CEO Christian, your Christmas, Easter only Christian that's gonna be your faithful giver. It's those that are just consistently there. 54% of them serve on a church committee. 53% of them are involved in a small group or a Sunday school class. So my application here is people's active attendance and faithful service often leads to active and faithful giving. Realize that it's not wealthy people who carry a church, it's faithful people. And that's true in every church on the planet. I've had the privilege of ministering to leaders in over 100 countries, and it's the faithful people that carry the work of the local church. Here's some interesting statistics that I just love. I love as a pastor. I love this. I gave out one-year Bibles in my church to encourage daily Bible reading. The more Bible reading people do, the more generous they are and the less debt they have. What's the number one way to get people to be generous? Get them in their Bibles more. It's kind of fascinating. There's an actual correlation between how often they read their Bible and how much they give. When it comes to, if they read the Bible 4 to 7 times a week, 85% of them give 10% or more. All right, that's just a fascinating statistic. The more Bible reading they do, the less debt they're going to have. If they read their Bible 7 days a week, they're less likely to have a mortgage. They're going to pay off that mortgage more quickly. They're less likely to have car payments. They're less likely to have credit cards that are past 30 days. Spiritual health equals financial health equals to generosity health. And so I as a pastor, I was very committed to getting my people in the Word and doing anything I could, because I knew that would bring transformation to their lives. And also the byproduct of that would help their life financially, and we also saw increased giving. When I became the pastor of my church, we hadn't made the budget in 4 years, and I asked them, I said, we're not meeting the budget. What are we teaching people to do here? And they said, we're trying to teach people to give to the budget. So it's not working. Well, I'm the pastor. We're going to teach people to give because of the Bible, not the budget. And we had a budget, and I said, that's our spending plan. It's never our giving goal. Our giving goal is going to be to honor God. And for 10 years, I taught people to give not because of budget, which was our spending plan. I taught because of the Bible, and that was our giving goal. And every year, we surpassed the budget, except for 1 year, we got 99% of the budget, but we collected hundreds of thousands for a building project in addition to the budget. And so we saw, extravagant and exponential giving as I taught generosity because of the Bible, not because of the budget. Budget's a spending plan. It should never be the giving goal.
Hey, Brian, that's a good setup for this poll question we've got coming up here. The next poll question, everyone, is on the screen there. Within the past 12 months, which of the following generosity or stewardship teaching has your church done? And again, you can select any that apply. Sermon or sermon series, financial classes, generosity devotionals for families, or none of the above. Be curious there. We've got about maybe 10 minutes of time left here, a little bit less than that, so we'll get through this as quickly as we can and give Brian a chance to take us down the home stretch. This will be a fun response list from everyone to see what people are doing.
Yeah.
Here it comes.
It's about teaching. Here comes the results, the drum roll.
Wow, look at that. That's wonderful. At least I think it's wonderful.
So I don't see it on my screen, but what do you have there?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. My bad. So 71% of you have done a sermon or sermon series in the past 12 months, 61% financial classes, 15% generosity devotionals for families, and only 8% haven't done any of the above. That doesn't mean they haven't done anything. There are other options too, but well, that suggests that there is education going on. Is 61% doing classes? That's very encouraging, I would think, Brian.
It is, absolutely, and that's a change from 10 years ago. In recent years, happened more and more. Sermon series has always been a kind of a standard way to approach this. Classes is a great way, and I've gone around the country and told people have Dave Ramsey classes, Crown Financial Ministries, Compass, different classes. But my frustration that I saw was those classes only got to a handful of people. If you're a church of 100, you offer them, you got 6 people coming. If you're a church of 1,000, you offer it, you got 20 people coming. You're a church of 4,000, you got 80 people coming. But what about the 98%? So that's why I ultimately ended up writing devotionals that would be given to every single family, biblically based devotionals. And by God's grace, in the last 5 years, about 3,000 churches have now utilized devotions that go to every family. And not only ministry that's doing this. There are other excellent materials out there, but it's the whole idea of doing something so the whole church is learning about this together, and that's kind of the focus. And so that's looking at people do financial generosity and financial principles from others. 92% learn biblical financial giving principles from 15 sources. 56% of them learn them from classes and authors, which you talked about. 49% learn from their pastors. 43% learn from their parents and grandparents. The application is people aren't born generous and they aren't born again generous. Generosity must be taught and caught. Churches must proactively put in plans in place to identify resources, programs, and materials that teach biblical financial and generosity principles, not for the sake of the budget, but because of the Bible. How to do that, we're not going to go into this in depth. There is an article that you can get at the end of this webinar, but any church, any size, anywhere can utilize these 5 key principles to lift, kind of grow generous givers in giving. You instruct the scriptures. You make it about the Bible, not the budget. You influence with resources, classes, materials, devotionals, booklets, videos. You involve with systems. That's your collections. You're passing the plate, your EFT, your online, your campaigns. You inspire with true stories. Generosity begets generosity, and you ignite with vision. In other words, you have things worthy of support. And when those 5 things are happening, you will grow generous givers and giving. Another thing people will be able to access at the end of this is we have identified 50 best practices, 80 best websites. That's the left-hand page, and a 12-month financial planning calendar. You can literally use this with the church committee. You can go down the first page, check off what you're currently doing, and then you can check off what you're doing, and then look at ideas and say, you know what, there's 50 things here. We're doing 11 of them. This next year, let's plan 3 or 4 more. And you can slowly integrate these things into the life of your church. And over 1, 2, 3, 4 years, you can get yourself where you're doing multiple things throughout the year that provide financial teaching and generosity teaching from a biblical perspective that brings increased giving. So what are the next steps? How do you move forward? You go ahead and you download those 50 best practices, 80 best webs, and the planning calendar. It's the most important pieces of paper you're going to get from this webinar. You go ahead and you use the worksheet on get the giving demographics from your church. And then you go ahead and you download the 20 Truths About Tithers. That's the full e-report. And you can have access to that. And again, that's normally sells for like $29.95, I think. But it's free as you participated today. It's free for you to share with your local church or ministry. And then we have other resources we're also going to provide for you.
I got to thank everybody. We've had questions coming in along the way, and they've been so relevant as you've been speaking, Brian, that I've tried to ask them right along the way. Dick he makes a good point here. He said, I used to teach that what mattered was not their share of our budget, but God's share of their income. That's a great
Amen.
way to, yeah. And I
that's a good way. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. And the only other question I think I wrote down that we didn't get to, Jennifer had asked Brian, for people who are in the pews, giving by envelopes maybe is not popular or preferred. Some people, of course, are going to just drop cash in an offering plate if it comes by. But for the person in the pew, what are other giving alternatives that seem to make sense in today's culture and climate?
Well, again, I'll just touch on briefly. You can pass in the plate. I believe there's a place that sometimes have a box in the back because people weren't there when the offering got passed. So you can have still have a box in the back. There's some churches that only have a box in the back. Again, online giving, if you have a website. Electronic funds transfer is growing in popularity among people. It's how many people handle a lot of their financial matters. And again, these days you can get an iPad and stick it in a box somewhere, and with a little square reader for free. That's a free resource you can get, and that's on the 50 best practices. You can literally have them swipe a debit card or a credit card and do that, and they can literally do that in the lobby. You can also open up stock brokerage accounts for those that want to transfer stock. Again, all of those are listed on the best practices, along with websites that actually are companies that have those services. So I give you the idea, but then I also try to point you to the website that can assist you in any of those 50 best practices.
Hey, Brian, a couple more questions have come in, and then we're going to have to wrap here to honor people's time. And for several of you who have asked, you will be receive an email with links to all the resources that Brian has talked about after the webinar is done. Here's an interesting question. You mentioned tithing in India. Any specific tips for developing world Christians? Tom is asking that question.
Yeah, again, you take it back to the biblical message. Like, for example, my devotional that I wrote is 400 scriptures, 40 biblical principles. That's been put in over 50 languages and is being used worldwide. Just recently it was used in Guatemala. 108 churches did a 40-day campaign. They distributed thousands of copies of the devotional in Spanish. On the 20th day, they had people serve the needy in their community, and they had over 15,000 people provide over 100,000 hours of volunteer hours on one day in their communities. And then they collected an offering to serve the needy, and they collected over $1 million. These churches collected over $1 million in Guatemala, which is one of the poorer Latin American nations. But it all started because they taught the Bible. They gave people the Word of God, the biblical principles, and that's where you have to go. You make this a Bible-centered message. God wants everyone on the planet to be generous. I don't believe in the prosperity gospel. He wants everybody rich. But God does want everyone to be generous with whatever they have. So the generosity message is global, and it's local, and it's for every believer on the planet. To learn to give from whatever they have.
Yeah. This is going to have to be our last question. There's a couple more coming in, and everyone, and we'll make Brian aware of these questions, and
I'll answer them personally. I'll be glad to answer them.
That would be great. But here's one last one, and I know this is a common question, Brian. Timothy is asking, have you found that special offerings have created less giving to the general budget?
Well, again, you just have to balance it out. You look at church history and what your focus is. If you're doing if you're doing lots of offerings all the time, you can overwhelm people. So I just think it's important to be strategic and careful and prayerful. But what I'm trying to show from the research is people will respond to different things, but you just have to be clear and you have to be focused. It's very easy. You can dilute people's giving capacity by having things going on all the time. It's like fundraisers in churches. You're selling things all the time. That can just be overwhelming.
Sure.
You really want to teach people to be givers, but realize that in addition to their giving to their church, they care about the needy, they care about missions, they care about their building project, and they care about their pastor and the staff.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the natural areas.
Yeah.
Maybe neglect some offerings and not dilute general giving.
Yeah. Well, Brian, you certainly have more information than many of us who have been listening, and we realize there's more. Everyone, as I've said, you're going to get an email that will link you to all the resources Brian has talked about. You see some of them listed there now. And ECCU also has related resources in addition to the ones that Brian offers. One of them that I'm excited to let you know about is Brian is going to be part of another webinar. We're going to do a webinar series to follow up on today's webinar on funding your vision and looking at 3 different options. You know, there's not any one way that God brings in all the funds for a ministry to fulfill their vision. And so we're going to do a series of 3 webinars that look at 3 options that can work together to make that happen. And you see them on the screen there, one on teaching generosity, which is Brian's passion, one on planned giving, and one on financing as a funding option. So I encourage you to take note of that, and you'll see the web address there where you can sign up. Well, again, Brian, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today and share the results of this really important research.
Like it's been from you and listeners, and we trust that people will take these materials, they'll utilize them, they'll share them, they'll pass it along to others. We live in a day and an age when giving has been declining for 40 years, the percentage that Christians give, and we need a move of God to bring back a teaching emphasis to this message that just releases generosity in unprecedented ways in our churches and in our communities and for the cause of Christ worldwide. So thank you to everybody for being part, and please be blessed and be a blessing to others as you share resources and materials.
Well, as I said, everybody, you'll be receiving an email with the links and so forth, and including the PowerPoint that you've been watching during the webinar. As you see on the screen there, if you've got questions about the kind of resources we provide, a couple of them are a financial health assessment to help your church or ministry evaluate your financial health as an organization, or look at cash reserves as a tool in your financial toolbox to help you be good stewards of the funds God brings. We have people on our staff who would be delighted to speak with you. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and God bless everyone. If you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.